My name is Samuel Hobbs. For 34 years, I have been a park ranger with the National Park Service. My official designation is Park Ranger GS 0025 Journey Level, with specializations in resource management and visitor protection. For the last 2 decades of my service, I have been stationed in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, specifically as the Senior Ranger for the Black Balsam Ranger District, a fictional designation I will use to protect the innocent and, perhaps more importantly, to keep the curious away from a place they should never go. In 3 months, I will retire. My career has been, by all official metrics, a successful one. I have planned and directed complex interpretive programs, explaining the delicate ecology of our temperate rainforest to thousands of visitors. I have managed patrols, issued permits, and served as a work leader for countless volunteer projects. I have been, as the Department of the Interior expects, a personable and well-informed ambassador for this land, fostering curiosity and providing educational opportunities for all. That is the public face of my job. My duties in interpretation require me to speak of the park as a sanctuary, a place of pristine, untouched beauty. My duties in visitor protection, however, require me to know the truth. This is the part of my service record that will be commended in a small ceremony where I will be given a plaque and a firm handshake. But there is another part of the job, a part that is never recorded in the official Incident Management Analysis and Reporting System IMARS, a part that exists only in worn, leather-bound binders passed from one senior ranger to the next, and in the haunted memories of those who have had to enforce its directives. This is the part of the job that deals with the real reason we have rules out here. And I am writing this now because I cannot, in good conscience, carry the weight of it into my retirement. This is my final report. This is the story of case file F241138, the weight of the land, a haunted history. To understand what happened, you must first understand the land. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park is not a wilderness. Not really. It is a place with a memory, and like some memories, it bears a grudge. Before this was a park, it was a home. For 1,000 years, the Cherokee lived here, their culture woven into the fabric of the mountains, understanding its rhythms and its spirits. They were followed by European settlers who built communities in the deep coves and on the steep hillsides. They carved out farms, raised families, and buried their dead in this soil for over a century. Cades Cove, Cataloochee, Greenbrier. These weren't just scenic loops, they were living, breathing communities. Then, in the 1920s and 30s, the idea for a national park in the east took hold. Unlike the western parks, which were carved from vast tracts of federally owned land, this park had to be bought, piece by painful piece, from the people who lived here. Over 100 small farms and thousands of people were displaced. The states of North Carolina and Tennessee, backed by a massive $5 million donation from John D. Rockefeller Jr., used the power of eminent domain to seize the land. Some families sold willingly, but many did not. They fought it in court, like John Oliver of Cades Cove, who took his case all the way to the Tennessee Supreme Court and lost. They protested. They watched as park officials burned their empty homes to erase their existence from the landscape. At a park celebration in 1986, Governor Lamar Alexander introduced a 98-year-old man who had owned property in Cades Cove. The old man stood, pointed his finger at the governor, and said, "You stole my land!" That bitterness soaked into the ground, a resentment born of displacement, of a people forced from their homes first by settlers, and then those same settlers forced out by the government. Before the park, massive timber companies had cut hundreds of thousands of acres, scouring the mountainsides and taking the virgin timber. The land was wounded twice, first by industry, then by preservation. This park was not born of peaceful conservation. It was born of conflict, loss, and profound sorrow. And the land remembers. It remembers the saws, it remembers the eviction notices, and it remembers the smoke from the homesteads. It is a living thing, and its history is a wound that has never healed. We, the National Park Service, are the wardens of that wound. The unofficial addendum, the rules, every ranger is issued a copy of the NPS management policies and the Law Enforcement Reference Manual, RM9. These are thick books filled with regulations, procedures, and the accumulated wisdom of the service. But in certain stations, like Black Balsam, there is another book. It's an old, 3-ring binder with a cracked leather cover. It has no official title or number. We just call it the addendum. It contains the standing orders for this district, a set of rules passed down from senior ranger to senior ranger. They are not folklore. They are not suggestions. They are protocols born from incidents that were never filed, from disappearances that were quietly closed, from things that defy the rational, orderly world of federal regulations. When I took over this post, my predecessor, a man named Frank, sat me down with that binder. "Sam," he said, his voice as dry as autumn leaves, "you follow the government's rules to manage the people. You follow these rules to survive the park. The rules are presented without explanation, only a justification code that hints at their grim origins. ASO 7.1 All personnel must be within a permanent, sealed structure from astronomical dusk to dawn. No exceptions for patrol or observation. Justification code Estercell Pafkataka SO 7.2 I auditory phenomena mimicking human speech. ERG calls, whispers originating from beyond the tree line are to be disregarded. A justification code Sonansoaramal SO 7.3 C. Do not approach, touch, or alter any non-NPS sanctioned stone structures, cairns, effigies. Record GPS coordinates and retreat. So justification code CELT URL RCSL SO 7.4 wildlife exhibiting behavior contrary to known biology is not to be engaged. Avert visual contact and withdraw from the area immediately. Justification code XLA Integri to SO 7.5. All SAR operations within the Fontana Fault Line Cave system are to be suspended by 15,000 hours. All teams must be exfiltrated by 16,000 hours. Justification code GOLO GXL XFT. These rules are the central, unspoken truth of our work here. They are a quiet acknowledgement that some things are beyond our jurisdiction. They are the reason some rangers in this district develop a 1,000-yard stare, and why the turnover rate is higher than in other parks. We are taught that our job is to protect the park from the people and the people from the park. The addendum makes it clear that our primary job is to protect people from what is in the park. The inciting incident, case file 241138, on a crisp Tuesday morning in late September, the call came in. The voice over the radio from dispatch was calm, routine, but the words sent a familiar chill down my spine. A hiker was overdue. His name was Michael Cerrone. He and a friend had been camping near the Deep Creek campground, not far from the southern boundary of my district, according to the reporting party. His friend, Cerrone, had decided to go for a quick solo hike that morning. He'd laughed off his friend's concerns, waved away a map, and said he'd be back by lunch. He was, in the wary parlance of seasoned rangers, a Turon, a portmanteau of tourist and moron, a perfect descriptor for someone who treats this ancient, complex landscape like an amusement park. They see the beauty, but have no concept of the danger. I began the paperwork, the familiar ritual that precedes every search and rescue SAR operation. I opened a new file, SASAN CIDN SAR 24 38, and started filling out the Form 10343. I got the friend on the phone and began the lost person questionnaire, gathering the essential details: name, age, physical description, clothing, medical conditions, last known positions, LKP. The friend was panicked but helpful. Michael Cerrone, 28, male, 5'10", wearing a bright blue jacket, black shorts, and trail runners. No known medical issues. No real backcountry experience. He'd last seen him heading north on the Thomas Divide Trail. Then he said the words that made the air in my office feel cold and thin. He was talking about some caves he'd read about online. Said he wanted to find them. Something about the Fontana Fault. My blood ran cold. The Fontana Fault line. I looked at the clock on my wall. It was 11:15. I looked at the addendum sitting on the corner of my desk. and I looked at Rule 7.5, its words stark and absolute. All SAR operations within the Fontana Fault Line Cave system are to be suspended by 1500 hours. All teams must be exfiltrated by 1600 hours. The clock was already ticking. This wasn't just another search for a lost Turon. This was a race, not just against the clock of survival that ticks for every lost person, but against a deadline set by something far older and far less forgiving than park regulations. I keyed the radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Hobbs. We have a potential SAR in Black Balsam. I'm mobilizing the teams now." The incident command post, ICP, was a flurry of controlled chaos. We set up at the trailhead where Saron's friend had last seen him, the point last seen, PLS, a critical anchor in the swirling sea of uncertainty that is every SAR mission. Maps were spread across the hoods of our trucks, search areas delineated in grease pencil, creating a patchwork of operational zones. I had 2 hasty teams ready to deploy. Team Alpha was led by a young, sharp ranger named Miller, barely 5 years with the service, but with an instinct for the woods that couldn't be taught. Team Bravo was under the command of a grizzled veteran, Dave, a man who'd been on more of these searches than he could count, and whose face was a roadmap of worry lines. "All right, listen up," I said, my voice sharp, cutting through the low murmur of radio checks and gear prep. "Subject is Michael Cerrone, 28, no significant outdoor experience. Last seen approximately 0800 hours this morning, heading north on the Thomas Divide Trail. He's a classic Turon, likely underestimated the terrain. He's wearing a bright blue jacket, which is a small blessing." I laid out the initial strategy: hasty searches of primary trails, drainages, and ridgelines, the paths of least resistance a lost person would likely follow. We needed to establish containment, setting up roadblocks and lookouts on the park roads, bordering the search area to prevent him from wandering out, and expanding our problem exponentially. Our probability of detection, or POD, is highest along these initial vectors, I explained, tapping the map. He's been missing for just over 3 hours. A healthy adult male, even an inexperienced one, can cover a surprising amount of ground, but panic is a poor navigator. He's likely either moving too fast and not thinking, or he's hunkered down somewhere, scared and waiting. I looked at Dave, whose eyes met mine with a knowing glance. He understood the subtext. I didn't have to say the words aloud. Fontana Fault Line, 1500 hours. The official reason for the hard stop would be the usual encroaching darkness, increased risk to the search teams, the need to regroup for a morning operation. But we knew the real reason was inked in that old leather binder. I handed out the lost person questionnaires and gear assignments, the familiar ritual, a thin veneer of normalcy over the gnawing urgency. Move fast, be thorough, and maintain radio contact. I concluded. The clock is ticking. As the teams fanned out into the dense, silent woods, I stayed at the ICP, coordinating the flow of information. The Forest of the Smokies is an entity unto itself. It's a temperate rainforest, a riot of life with over 1,500 species of flowering plants and more than 140 species of trees. Tulip poplars, hemlocks, and oaks form a dense canopy that can swallow the sky, plunging the forest floor into a perpetual twilight. It's a place of profound beauty and profound indifference. For someone like Cerrone, it would be disorienting, terrifying. My mind turned to the patterns, the grim science of lost person behavior that researchers like Robert Coester had spent careers defining. An inexperienced hiker, once disoriented, often succumbs to a series of predictable, and often fatal, psychological traps. There's the initial denial, the refusal to believe they are truly lost. Then comes the panic, a surge of adrenaline that fuels frantic, aimless movement. They might try to bend the map, forcing the terrain to fit their mental image of where they should be, rather than accepting where they are. Cerrone fit the profile of someone who might engage in view-enhancing, climbing a ridge or a tree to try and get his bearings, a strategy that often leads to falls or further disorientation. Or he might follow a drainage downhill, a common folk wisdom that can lead into impassable gorges and waterfalls. He was a young man, likely fit, which could be a liability. His physical ability might carry him farther into trouble before exhaustion and dehydration set in, shrinking his survival timeline. I looked at the map, at the jagged contour lines that represented the fault line area. The caves were a powerful lure, an attraction area that would draw in the curious and the foolish. He wouldn't be the first. The park has its share of unsolved disappearances, cold cases that linger in the back of every ranger's mind. Dennis Martin, Trenny Gibson, Polly Melton. Names that had become part of the park's grim folklore. Cautionary tales whispered among rangers. I pushed the thought away. We had to assume we were in a rescue, not a recovery. A trail of pollen, just after 1300 hours, Miller's voice crackled over the radio. Command, this is Alpha. We've got to find. My heart leaped. Go ahead, Alpha. A piece of fabric. Bright blue nylon, snagged on a rhododendron bush about 50 yards off the main trail, near the junction with an old logging road. Copy that. Mark the location and bag it as evidence. Anything else? Affirmative, Command. We have a single, clear footprint in a patch of damp earth nearby. Looks like a trail runner, consistent with the subject's footwear. Hold your position, Alpha. I'm on my way. I grabbed my evidence kit and hiked out to their position. The footprint was clear, a perfect impression in the dark, rich soil. Standard procedure dictated that I document and photograph it before taking a cast. But as I knelt, something else caught my eye. The soil inside the print seemed subtly different, a slightly paler, dustier shade than the surrounding earth. It was almost imperceptible. On a hunch, I took out a sterile collection vial and carefully scraped a sample of the soil from within the footprint, then another from the ground beside it for control. I labeled them according to protocol case, Fen 24-11-38, date, time, location, my name. It was a long shot, but we had a contact at the state university, a specialist in a field most people have never heard of: forensic palynology, the study of pollen and spores as evidence. Pollen grains are microscopic, produced in vast quantities, and their outer shells are made of a substance called sporopollenin, one of the most durable organic materials known. They can survive for years, even millennia, and their unique shapes can identify a plant down to the genus or species level. Every location has a unique pollen print. If Cerrone had been in the caves, the dust on his shoes might contain pollen or fungal spores, unique to that subterranean environment, different from the forest floor. It was Locard's principle of exchange in microscopic form. Every contact leaves a trace. This tiny sample of dust could confirm he was heading for the caves, or tell us if we were on the wrong track entirely. The footprint and the torn fabric pointed us further north, deeper into the rugged terrain that sloped towards the Fontana Fault. The air grew cooler, the forest quieter. The usual chatter of birds and insects seemed to fade, replaced by a low, oppressive silence. It was a feeling every ranger in this district knew. The land itself was telling you to turn back. Around 1420 hours, Dave's team Bravo radioed in. His voice was strained. Command Bravo, we're approaching a series of rock outcroppings. Looks like the entrance to the fault line system. Copy, Bravo. Proceed with caution. A few minutes later, he was back on. Command, we're hearing something. A voice. Sounds like someone calling for help, but it's faint, and it seems to be coming from all around us. My hand tightened on the radio. Standing Order 7.2I auditory phenomena mimicking human speech are to be disregarded. Justification cis or animal. I thought of the theories about infrasound, low-frequency sound waves generated by wind moving through complex geological structures like caves. Frequencies below human hearing that can still affect the body, causing feelings of anxiety, dread, even hallucinations. A rational explanation for an irrational feeling, but the rule wasn't about infrasound. It was older than that. Disregarded. Bravo. I ordered, my voice flat. It's a known phenomenon in this area. Wind and rock formations. Stay focused on visual signs. There was a pause. I could picture Dave looking at his younger team members, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. "Copy that, Command," he finally said, the reluctance clear in his tone. 10 minutes later, they found it. At the base of a sheer rock face, partially hidden by a thicket of mountain laurel, was a dark, narrow fissure. A mouth in the ancient stone. Cold, damp air, smelling of wet rock and deep earth, flowed from the opening. Lying on the ground, just inside the entrance, was a single object, a half-empty plastic water bottle. The same brand Saron's friend had described. Dave's voice was grim. "Command, we have visual confirmation." He went in. I looked at my watch. 14:45. 15 minutes until the 1500 deadline. We had a location. We had a subject confirmed to be inside. But we were out of time. Standard SAR protocol would be to send in a specialized cave rescue team, but that would take hours to mobilize. My duty to Michael Saron, the lost hiker, screamed at me to send Miller and his team in for a quick look, a hasty search of the entrance zone. But my duty to my rangers, and my knowledge of what that binder represented, held me back. The rule was absolute. All teams must be exfiltrated by 1600 hours. To send them in now would be to defy a warning written in decades of loss. The radio crackled, waiting for my command. The forest held its breath. And in the deep, dark fissure in the mountainside, something waited too. The 15 minutes I had until the 1500 hours deadline stretched into an eternity. On one shoulder sat my duty as an incident commander, a role defined by federal manuals and a sworn responsibility to the lost. Michael Saron was in that cave. To abandon the search now felt like a dereliction of that duty. On the other shoulder sat the heavy, unseen presence of my predecessors, their warnings echoing from the cracked pages of the addendum. The rules were not suggestions. They were survival protocols paid for in blood and mystery. I made a choice, a compromise, a decision to bend a rule I knew should never be broken. "Command to Alpha and Bravo," I said into the radio, my voice tight. "Bravo, hold your position at the entrance. Maintain visual containment. Alpha, you are cleared for a limited penetration. Hasty search of the entrance zone. You have until 1500 hours, not 1 second past. Your objective is to find visual sign of the subject, nothing more. If you make contact, assess his condition and report immediately. Do not, I repeat, do not proceed beyond the area illuminated by the cave entrance." "Acknowledge." Miller's voice came back instantly, crisp and confident. "Alpha acknowledges. Proceeding with limited entry. We're on the clock." Dave's acknowledgement was slower, laced with a reluctance I understood all too well. "Bravo copies. Maintaining position." I watched the second hand on my watch sweep, each tick a hammer blow against my conscience. I had just sent 2 of my rangers into a place the addendum explicitly forbade after this hour. I was gambling their lives against the slim chance of finding Saron, and I knew the odds were not in my favor. The stress was a physical weight, constricting my chest, a known physiological response to high-stakes decision-making. I was a park ranger, a protector, but in that moment, I felt like a man pushing his chips onto a cursed table. Miller and his partner, a young ranger named Chen, clicked on their headlamps and ducked into the fissure. The transition was instantaneous and absolute. One moment they were in the familiar, sun-dappled forest of the Appalachians. The next, they were in another world. The air temperature dropped 20 degrees, the humidity soaring to a near-constant mist that clung to their skin. The sounds of the forest, the wind, the birds, the rustle of leaves, were gone, swallowed by a profound, oppressive silence that seemed to press in on their eardrums. It was a silence that felt ancient and aware. Their headlamps cut sharp cones of white light into a darkness so complete it felt solid, a physical presence. The cave was not a simple tunnel. It was a product of Appalachian geology. Layers of limestone and dolomite, folded and faulted by millions of years of tectonic pressure, creating a chaotic network of irregular passages, tight squeezes, and sudden drops. The walls were slick with moisture, smelling of wet earth, stone, and something else, a faint, metallic tang like old blood or rust. They moved cautiously, their boots crunching on the gravelly floor. "See anything?" Miller whispered into his radio mic, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. "Negative," Chen replied, his voice tight. "Just rock." They followed the main passage for about 30 yards, staying well within sight of the daylight filtering through the entrance. They saw scuff marks on the damp floor, confirming Saron's path. Then Chen's light caught something. "Hold up, I've got something." Lying half submerged in a shallow pool of crystal clear water was a bright blue jacket. It was Saron's. A few feet beyond it, tucked into a small alcove, was his day pack. "Command, this is Alpha. We found the subject's jacket and pack approximately 30 yards inside the entrance. No sign of Saron himself." "Copy that, Alpha," I replied, my eyes fixed on my watch. 14:56. 4 minutes left. "Document and prepare to withdraw." "Roger." Chen is checking the pack now. As Chen carefully lifted the pack, Miller swept his light around the alcove. That's when he saw it. On the wall behind where the pack had been, there were markings. They weren't natural geological formations, nor were they modern graffiti. They were symbols, meticulously carved into the stone, filled with a dark pigment that seemed to absorb the light. They resembled no petroglyph he had ever seen in any Park Service manual. They were complex, geometric, and deeply unsettling. "Command." Miller's voice was strained. "We have some kind of markings on the wall here. Looks like some kind of ritualistic symbols. They don't look Cherokee. They don't look like anything I've ever seen." My blood ran cold. Rule 7.3: do not approach, touch, or alter any non-NPS sanctioned structures, cairns, effigies. This wasn't a structure, but it was close enough. "Do not touch them, Miller. Photograph them and pull back. You have 2 minutes." "There's something else," Miller said, his voice dropping lower. "There's a smell, getting stronger, like ozone or burnt sugar." Then Chen spoke, his voice trembling. "His phone is in the pack, and his wallet. Everything's here. But there's this." He held up a small object that had been tucked into the pack's side pocket. It was a crude figurine, woven from what looked like human hair and twigs of a plant they didn't recognize, bound together with strips of animal sinew. In the center of the effigy was a single, milky, white bird's eye. My stomach clenched. This was wrong. All of it. The abandoned gear, the strange symbols, the effigy. This wasn't a simple case of a lost hiker anymore. This was a trespass. Saron had walked into a place he shouldn't have, and he had disturbed something.
1 minute, Alpha! Get out now!
I commanded, my voice raw. "Just a few more seconds, Sam," Miller pleaded. "I think I see something further down the passage."
Negative! That's an order! Withdraw immediately!
As if in response to my command, a sound echoed from the depths of the cave. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't Saron. It was a low, guttural chittering, a sound that scraped at the edges of their hearing and vibrated in the bones of their skulls. It was the sound of something ancient and utterly inhuman. "We're moving," Miller yelled, all pretense of calm gone. He and Chen scrambled back towards the entrance, their lights bouncing wildly off the slick, dark walls. As they reached the threshold, a deep groaning sound echoed behind them, and with a deafening crash, a section of the passage they had just been in collapsed, sending a plume of thick, choking dust billowing out of the cave mouth. They tumbled out into the daylight, gasping for air, their faces pale with terror. It was 15:01. They were 1 minute late. By 16 Dutter hours, both teams were back at the ICP. The exfiltration deadline met. The mood was grim. Miller was furious, convinced he'd been on the verge of finding Saron. Dave was quiet, his face etched with the relief of a man who had stared into the abyss and been allowed to step away. I debriefed them, collected the evidence, the jacket, the pack, the disturbing effigy, and logged it all according to procedure. The official report would be straightforward. Search teams located the subject's belongings, but were forced to withdraw due to unstable geological conditions. The chittering sound and the strange markings would not be in the official IMARS report. They would be recorded by hand in my own log, destined for the leather binder. As dusk began to settle, casting long, deep shadows across the mountains, my satellite phone rang. It was Dr. Aris Thorne, the forensic palynologist from the university. "Sam," he said, his voice crackling with excitement, "I have the preliminary results from that soil sample you sent." "It's extraordinary. What did you find, Aris?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "Well, as you suspected, the sample from the shoe print is loaded with spores from Pellucidum silentium, that rare, cave-dwelling bioluminescent fungus found only in the Fontana system. Confirms your man was heading right for it. But that's not the interesting part. The control sample from beside the print shows a typical pollen profile for this time of year in the Smokies oak, hickory, ragweed, the usual suspects. The sample from the shoe, however, Sam, it's an impossible assemblage." "Impossible how?" "It contains pollen from species that haven't grown in this hemisphere for thousands of years. I'm seeing ghost pollen from the American chestnut, sure, but I'm also seeing pollen from Archifructus, an extinct aquatic plant from the early Cretaceous period, and spores from Carboniferous tree ferns. It's a geological impossibility. The only way this pollen profile could exist on someone's shoe is if they weren't just walking into a cave." He paused, and I finished the sentence for him, the cold truth settling in my gut like a stone. "But walking into another time." I looked out at the mountains, the ancient, brooding peaks silhouetted against the dying light. The Cherokee believed in a world of spirits, a world that existed alongside our own, in the spaces between. The Nanihi, the spirit people who lived in the mountains, were said to sometimes take lost hunters into their homes, places where time flowed differently. Cerrone hadn't just gotten lost in the woods. He had crossed a threshold. He had trespassed into a place far older and stranger than any national park. The search for Michael Cerrone was over, but my work was just beginning. I now had to shift from rescue to containment. I had to ensure that no one ever made the same mistake again. I had to seal the wound. The night was long. Back at the incident command post, under the cold, sterile hum of the generator-powered lights, I began the final, grim task of closing the case. There are two kinds of reports in this job: the one that goes into the official record, and the one that tells the truth. For the official incident management analysis and reporting system, IMARS, the narrative for case file FA241138 was clinical and concise. I documented the timeline, the deployment of assets, and the discovery of the subject's personal effects at the cave entrance. I cited the unforeseen and catastrophic geological event, the passage collapse, as the primary reason for the immediate suspension of the search. I attached Miller's and Dave's statements, carefully edited to remove any mention of anomalous auditory phenomena or strange markings. The official cause for suspending the search indefinitely was extreme and ongoing risk to rescue personnel due to geological instability. The next morning, I filed a formal recommendation with the park superintendent. Setting the collapse, I argued that the entire Fontana Fault line cave system was an unacceptable hazard. I recommended its permanent closure to the public and its removal from all official park maps and literature. It was a matter of public safety, a straightforward, bureaucratic procedure. There would be studies, assessments, and eventually a work order. The wheels of government would grind slowly, but they would grind. I had given them a monster they could understand liability. The evidence from Cerrone's pack was processed with similar detachment. The jacket, the water bottle, the phone, all were tagged, bagged, and logged according to the Department of the Interior's evidence handling protocols. The strange woven effigy with the bird's eye was labeled Item Hui241138, E40 unidentified object, possible folk art. It would sit in an evidence locker for years before being quietly disposed of. The photographs of the symbols on the cave wall were filed under unusual geological formations. They would gather dust in a forgotten folder. The official story was complete, a neat and tidy narrative of a tragic accident. A tourist, unprepared and inexperienced, had wandered into a dangerous area and paid the ultimate price. Case closed. Then I opened the old leather binder, the addendum, my real report. On a fresh sheet of heavy, acid-free paper, I wrote with my own pen, the ink a stark black against the cream page. I wrote the truth. I detailed the impossible pollen analysis from Dr. Thorne, a scientific fact that defied all known geology and history. I described the symbols on the wall, sketching them from memory, and from the photos I had kept for this purpose alone. I wrote about the effigy, its texture of hair and sinew, its single, milky eye. I described the chittering sound that vibrated in the bone, a sound that was not animal, not human, not of this earth. I added a new entry, a new rule born from this tragedy. He SO 7.6a, the Fontana Fault, line cave system, is to be considered a permanent containment zone. No entry for any purpose, including geological survey or biological research. The sealed entrance is not to be disturbed. Justification code. Temporal hazardi. I placed the page into the binder, its final resting place among the other grim warnings. This was the true weight of the job. Not the rescues, not the patrols, but the secrets. The knowledge that this park, this beautiful, wounded land, was not just a sanctuary for flora and fauna, but a prison for something else. Something that had been here long before the Cherokee, long before the settlers, long before the mountains themselves were old. The pollen proved it. Cerrone hadn't just stepped into a cave. He had stepped out of time, swallowed by a place that operates on rules far older than our own. He was the ultimate victim at the mercy of the monster, a monster that was the place itself. And his damnation was not death, but an eternity of being lost. It took 2 months. 2 months of pushing paperwork, of answering questions from regional headquarters, of insisting that the danger was real. I used the full weight of my 34 years of service, my reputation as a steady, no-nonsense ranger, to get it done. Finally, the order came through. We didn't use dynamite. That felt too violent, too much like a challenge. Instead, a team of park engineers and a construction crew brought in tons of rock and concrete. We filled the fissure, burying the entrance under a man-made rock slide. We packed it tight, sealing the mouth of that cave for what I prayed would be forever. Then, we brought in native soil and plants, rhododendron, mountain laurel, young hemlocks, and painstakingly landscaped the area, hiding our work, erasing the scar from the mountainside. Within a few years, no one would ever know a cave had been there. We were not just closing a hole, we were healing a wound, or at least, putting a bandage on it. As the last of the crew packed up their tools, I stood there for a long time, looking at the place where the fissure had been. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by the familiar, comforting sounds of the forest. The birds had returned. It felt as if the land itself had breathed a sigh of relief. 3 months after the disappearance of Michael Cerrone, I stand on the porch of the ranger station, my last day before retirement. The air is crisp with the promise of winter. My replacement, a young ranger with bright eyes and a crisp uniform, is inside, familiarizing himself with the station. On the desk, I have left the keys, the official manuals, and the stack of park regulations. Beside them sits the old leather binder. I will sit down with him, just as Frank sat down with me 2 decades ago. I will explain the 2 sets of rules. I will tell him that his most important job is not to interpret the park's history, but to keep people from becoming a part of its darker, unwritten one. I look out at the mountains, their ancient blue ridges rolling away to the horizon. They are a place of profound beauty, a testament to endurance. But they are also a place of profound sorrow, a land that remembers every wound, every loss. The Cherokee knew it. The displaced settlers knew it. And now I know it too. This park was created to preserve a wilderness, but our true job, the one recorded only in the addendum, is to preserve a boundary between our world and something else. Michael Cerrone was a Turon, a fool who broke the common sense rules of the wilderness. But his true fatal mistake was breaking rules he could never have known existed. He trespassed, and the land, in its ancient, indifferent way, passed its sentence. My final act as a ranger was to make sure no one could ever follow him. I did my job. I protected the people from what is in the park. Because out here, in the deep, old heart of the mountains, we have rules for a reason.